Real quick before the video starts, just want to let you know that this isn't really going to be a visually impressive video. It's just going to be more of a lecture style video. I made it for my corp to teach them about wormhole space, so I don't have to go through it a million times, but I figured I'd share it publicly for everyone else that's trying to learn some stuff about wormhole space. As always, leave your leave your questions in the comments below, and help each other out if you know the answers to some of this. Alright dudes, today we're going to talk about something very important in the EVE Online universe, and that is wormholes. Now first question, what are wormholes? Well, they're a thing. Next question, what do they do? Well, they take you magical places. That's pretty much the thick of it. But seriously, wormholes are one of the cooler parts in EVE because they take you away from anything that involves local chat or sovereignty, which is kind of cool. So that means there's no goons. Well, okay, sorta. There's kind of goons, but not really. Anyways, wormholes started. It's something in the lore not often talked about, but there was like this explosion of, I think it was Isogen 5. Like all the Isogen 5 on every planet in New Eden detonated at the same time. I don't know if it was Isogen 5. I'm trying to find it, but nobody's really talking about it anywhere. So I'll have to get back to you on that one. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go into each of the 6 wormhole classes in a pretty in-depth discussion. First is going to be Class 1 or C1 space is commonly referred to. The combat sites in this class are pretty dang easy. DPS usually reaching 300-400 at most. You can pretty much do it in any T3D that as long as it's cap injected. Battle cruisers such as the Myrmidon are usually pretty over-tanked for this. I used to do a passive Gila that I could cruise around really fast. I think the fit cost me about 300 million, maybe less than that. Wasn't really that big of a deal. But the ISK per hour you can pull out of this is pretty easily 60 million to 100 million depending on your salvage drops, which we'll talk about salvage and loot later. Next thing is the scannable signatures. There are 2 different types. There are the pirate or nullsec data and relic sites that you're used to scanning down in K-Space, which you just run up and hack, and then there's the sleeper sites. Sleeper sites have rats in them that are slightly stronger than the combat sites in the system, and they drop a little bit more loot, and then after you kill everything, or if you're cheeky about it, you can hack them, those canisters, and get the loot out of them. Honestly, they're not really worth it unless there's a Talakin, which a Talakin is a random spawn, but usually has really good drops in it. Data sites, I would not do them for the hacking. I would do them for the blue loot. Relic sites, yeah, some of the drops are pretty good. The gas in C1 space, really meh, so I won't go there expecting to make a lot of ISK just from gas harvesting. Statics, that's what's next. The statics in a class 1 wormhole are always going to be K-space, so either high sec, low sec, or null sec. That's it. And the only other restriction in a C1 is the only ships that can enter it or leave it are cruiser or medium class ships, so battle cruisers, cruisers, and below, except for the Nestor. The Nestor is the only battleship that can enter or leave this wormhole. You can still build capitals, battleships, whatever you want in the wormhole, but they will never leave. C2 space. Combat sites, not worth it. Don't even worry about it. The EHP on the sites is fairly high compared to C1s and pretty low compared to C3s. And I've noticed that if you can do a C2 site, you can probably do a C3 site, and C3s are much better, and you'll hear why in a couple minutes. But these sites usually take you can't really do them in a battle cruiser. I mean, you can if you over tank it, but it's just going to be so slow that you could probably get a decent ship for the next class. So I would say don't worry about it. Don't even bother unless a relic site has a Talakin. Don't worry about it. Scannables or signatures are pretty similar to C1 in that there's some NPC or pirate faction relic sites that you'd find a nullsec in here mixed in with the sleeper data relic sites. The gas here still meh. I'd call it slightly less meh. You're probably only going to get the really cheap stuff, so don't expect to get boatloads of ISK out of here. I've heard there's chances of the really good ones spawning here, but I have not seen any of the really good sites spawn here, such as a Vital Core, or I think, what's the other one? There's Vital Core, and I can't think of the other one, but it'll be in the C5 one when I get there. So I wouldn't worry about gas harvesting in here unless you're looking for a specific type of gas for T3 production, which is another topic entirely. The statics in here, this is where things get interesting. A C2 wormhole has two statics, one going to K space, one going to wormhole space. Now I've seen a list that there's a specific type, like there's 3 different types of ones going to high sec. There's a C4 to high sec, there's a C3 to high sec, and I think there's a C2 to high sec type of C2. And then there's a C3 to low sec, a C5 to null, and a C5 and null sec static, I'm sorry, and a C6 and null sec static. I'm pretty sure those are the only 6 types of C2 static combos. I could be wrong, but that's what I read on EVE University. And in personal experience, I've never seen the others. The ship sizes in this wormhole, you can bring up to a battleship class ship through the wormhole. So capitals can still be built inside, but they cannot transit the holes. Alright, now on to my favorite class of wormhole is C3. This is my favorite because the ISK is pretty easy, and you can easily get 200 to 300 ISK per hour out of this, if it's optimal conditions, of course. The ships that I would say to use for this are, you can do a pretty poor fit rattlesnake, pretty solid. I think a Tengu can still do it even after the changes. A Bling Stratios can do it. You need to be cap injected though, because the newts here can be pretty rough, but the ISK per hour is very effective. One way that I found to do it is using a remote rep battleships, so like 2 Armageddons or 2 Dominixes. That's a pretty good way to do it. You can do it pretty fast. You just got to make sure you have cap transfers, armor transfers, and you got to have the drone range, because some of the ships like to orbit out at around 60, 65 kilometers. Not often though. Scannables, again, very similar to class 1 and 2. The only difference here is that the data and relic sites might point you, so warping out when things go wrong might not be an option, so you need to be prepared when you go in. Gas here is getting pretty decent. This is where you start to see more frequent C32 spawns, which, if you don't know, that's a pretty middle of the road gas, which you can actually make a decent amount of money doing that. Statics 1K space, so high sec, low sec, or null sec. Battleship sizes that are allowed to enter are I don't know what I was trying to say there. Yeah, ship sizes, battleship or below. Alright, halfway through, moving on to C4 space. C4 space, again, combat sites, solo, not really worth it. Reason being, you need a blinged out rattlesnake to do this, or a rather porous fit marauder. Either way, that's a lot of ISK, and the EHP and return on these sites, not very high. Each site is worth about 80 million, but you could also just run data relic sites in a C3 space if you're doing the sleeper ones. You can do that and get 88 million out of those sites. So, and those are a lot easier, and you can still do it in a rather cheap rattlesnake. So I don't think it's really worth it. You might think otherwise, but that's my perspective. The only thing is, in these sites, all of them will point you, or at least have a chance to point you. So the warp out, warp in might not be an option again. Once you go in, you're committed, unless you have a micro jump drive, because they don't scram, they only point. The difference in the scannable SIGs here, there are no NPC or pirate data relic sites. The exception to this is in a shattered wormhole, which we'll talk about that later. The gas is pretty decent here. There's a better chance of you finding like a vital core or something here. Not a great chance, but it's still possible. I've seen it. Again, C4 space is like C2 space. It has 2 wormhole statics. Well, it has 2 statics, but they both go to wormhole space, as opposed to the C2 only gets 1 to wormhole space. So C4 space is usually highly sought after for its PvP. When you have like a C5 to C3 connection, or wormhole, that's usually pretty good, because you can get the ratting and some PvP from the C5 with the bigger corpse, and the C3 gives you good solo ISK. The size for ships is still battleship or smaller. Nothing's changed there. Alright, let's keep her moving into C5 space. The combat sites here is where you can really get some good solo ISK, or even just two-person ISK. Because the sites here, if you're running the good ones, they're worth about 500 million to 550, even 600 with the drifter. And if you can do these with the dual dreadnought method, which is really profitable, you can run these sites in like 15 minutes. So you figure you run 4 of those, and with 2 guys, because you can do it in 2 dreads, that's 1.2 billion a piece. That's for an hour of running. That's pretty good money. Solo, it's a little bit harder. Like if you're just one person, you're going to be running it in more. You're going to have to do it in a blinged out Marauder, because that's the only other ship that can handle it. Specifically, the Paladin is the best in my opinion, because it can just get crazy cap regen. That's my opinion. You can probably do it in a Vargur, maybe a Golem, but I don't think a Kronos can do it. I'm pretty sure a Kronos can't do it. Well, maybe. I haven't done it in a Kronos, so I wouldn't know. The thing is here, there are escalations, so when you warp capitals in, the first capital will spawn a wave of 3 upgraded Avengers that have crazy amounts of EHP. They newt really hard, and they hit you fairly hard. I think it's like an extra 800 or 900 DPS on the wave. It might be even over 1,000. But either way, it's pretty rough. So if you bring a capital in, don't expect to bring any Marauders in or solo sub-capitals, because they'll probably just get blapped. The next thing to note is at the end of the site, a structure will spawn called the Decloaked Transmission Relay, and that's at the end of the last wave. So if you aggress that structure, you will spawn the Arithmos Tyrannos, which is the Drifter Response Battleship. This thing will target you based on mass of ship on field. So if you're in the heaviest ship, prepare to get targeted. It doesn't often switch targets. I've heard that it does a little bit now, but this thing has like this one ship has the same EHP as like the entire site. So I wouldn't do this unless you have dreads on grid. One method I've seen people do this in is run the site with subcaps, spawn the drifter while they're aligning out, warp out, and then track the drifter, watch where it warps in system, because this guy will warp around your system. He'll stay in system for 3 days before despawning, and he'll wreck you if you're not paying attention. I've seen many people lose PI haulers, small combat ships, because they didn't realize the drifter was on grid with them running around. But yeah, if you track him after the site, then you tackle him on a planet, and then you can warp a capital in without spawning the upgraded Avengers, because you're not in sight. So that's another way to kind of cheekily do it. I think that's pretty much everything to do with the combat sites. Again, with the scannable SIGs, there is no NPC, nullsec, data relic sites. And also the data and relic sites in here, the sleeper ones, they do escalate as well. So if you bring a capital in, you will get the upgraded Avengers. However, at the end of the site, there is no drifter. The gas here is really good. This is where you start to see vital cores pretty frequently. Its static is one wormhole static. The nice thing between these wormholes is if you get a C5 or C6 connection from a C5, they do allow capitals to transit the holes. Not super capitals, capitals. And that makes for some really interesting inter-wormhole combat. Woo, on to the last one, C6 space. Combat sites, not really sure if you can solo these, honestly. I've never seen or heard of it done. That seems to be a Russian thing. C6 space, for some reason, is really political, from what I've been told. And that Russians hold, like, all of them. I'm not sure if that's true. That's just what I've heard from my friends in bigger Wormhole Corps. So, unconfirmed. I think the dual dread thing still works, although the escalations now spawn 4 upgraded Avengers. So, that might be a little rough with the newting pressure, because they newt pretty hard. Scannable signatures, again, I'm going to chalk that up there as hardly worth it. The data relic sites, because they're going to be harder. Data relic sites are always harder than the combat equivalent. There goes my phone again. Sorry about that. The gas here, pretty good, pretty common to see vital cores in here, so get that good ISK. The statics are, again, 1 wormhole. Go into any other class space. The ship size between wormholes in here, or I should say, from a C5 or another C6, capitals again, still no super capitals. Super capitals are not allowed in wormhole space. So I think that about sums up everything I want to say about the different classes. Next, we're going to move into the different effects. Actually, no. Shattered wormholes. What are shattered wormholes? Shattered wormholes are wormholes where you cannot put up pauses, you cannot anchor structures except for a mobile depot or mobile tractor unit, stuff like that. The small anchorables you can. Other than that, there are no moons. The moons are, if you try and warp to a planet, you'll see shattered moons around it, like just blown up. Go ahead and look at them. They're really cool. There's also a beacon in the middle, and it will always start with J0. It might even start with J00, except there is one legacy system. There is one normal wormhole that starts with J0. There might be a few, but there's not many. But you'll see the epicenter on your overview if you have beacons enabled, so you'll know it's a shattered wormhole. Shattered wormholes always have one extra static than their class typically does. So if it's a C1, 3, 5, or 6, it'll have 2 statics. If it's a C2 or C4, it'll have 3. They probably won't be listed because people like to keep that stuff hush-hush, especially when people suitcase out of an orca in one of these systems. That's surprisingly pretty common for people to take like a DST in and a combat ship and just farm the system for a while, especially if it's like a C13 wormhole, which a C13 is a wormhole that only allows frigates through. It's so Tech 3 destroyers are good, because the C13s have what's called a Wolf Rayet effect, which we'll get into that in a little bit, but you'll understand why the small ships are very good there. You can also kind of sneak in a heavy interdiction cruiser. Oh no, somebody's going to freak out because Discord went off and didn't realize I was recording. Oh no. But anyways, you can sneak a heavy interdiction cruiser in there, but I'm not going to tell you how. You can tell me in the comments below if you know how to do it. Otherwise, yeah, it's a secret. Shoot, I forgot to mention, in a shattered wormhole, it will always have sights from its class, the class below it, and the class above it. So if you have, for instance, a C3 shattered wormhole, you're going to find sights that are of C2 difficulty, C3 difficulty, and C4 difficulty. So you need to be very careful and be very aware of the name of the site you're warping to, so you don't accidentally warp to the wrong one that you can't do. I think that about covers all of it. Also, in almost every single class, there will be the possibility of pirate data relic sites spawning in these systems. So yeah, that should be it for Shattered Wormhole. Alright, as if wormhole space couldn't get any more complicated, now each wormhole has a system effect. There are 6 of these, and then there is the no effect. So we're going to quick go through each of them. The first one is a pulsar. A pulsar in a C6 wormhole increases your shield capacity by 100%, reduces your armor resists by 50%, decreases your capacitor recharge time, so that means it recharges faster, it cuts that in half, it increases your signature radius by 100%, and Nosferatus and Newts drain double the amount that they used to. Now keep in mind that's in a C6 wormhole. Each class, for instance, here in a class 1, its base is 30%. For shields, neg 15 armor, neg 15 recharge time, plus 30 shield radius, plus 30 newt amount. That will go up, increasing in regular intervals up until its max. So keep that in mind when you're in a C1. You're not in a C6. You need to be careful. You need to be aware of these exact numbers for the class space you're in. All right, now black hole. A black hole in a C6 wormhole will give you plus 50% to your missile velocity, plus 100% to missile explosion velocity. So it'll be harder to apply, but your missiles will travel a lot further. Your ship velocity is increased by 100%. The stasis webifier is only half as effective, so it's a lot harder to slow things down. Your ship inertia is up by 50%, which means turning is not quite as easy, and align times are going to go up from when you're moving, and your targeting range is up 100%, so you can really do some pretty cool sniping in here, or some really cool kiting. The next one is a cataclysmic variable. I actually used to live in one of these, wasn't a huge fan. In a C6 wormhole, local armor repair amount is down 50%. Remote repair amount is up 100%. Local shield repair down 50%. Essentially remote shield repairs is up 100%. Capacitors, your capacity goes up 100%. Your recharge time takes longer, unfortunately. And your cap transfers are not nearly as effective. So cap chaining isn't really a thing. You're going to want to shoot for local cap stability, which nesters are really good at this. If you throw a couple cap batteries on there, they are wonderful ships for a cataclysmic variable, simply because they can rep a ton and can still be cap stable under their own reps. Alright, next we're moving on to a magnetar, by far the most contested wormhole effect, except maybe a pulsar's above that, but I'm pretty sure magnetar is the most. Magnetar increases your damage by 100% in a class 6. Yeah, this is where we get like the 3500 DPS Vindicators. I just rip things apart. These things are literally high angle dreads in those wormholes. Except the problem is application really suffers. Missile explosion radius is up 50%. Tracking speed on drones and your guns is cut in half. Your targeting range is cut in half, and target painters are half as effective, and that's in a class 6 wormhole. Next, we're moving on to red giants. Red giants, they make your overheating really effective, but you take more damage from overheating. So your heat damage from overheating is increased by 50%. Your overload bonus, so that means if you overheat, the bonus you get from that is increased by 100%. Your smart bomb range is increased by 100%. Damage is increased by 100% on those smart bombs, and your bomb launchers will deal double the damage. The next one to go over is the Wolf Rayette system, which is one of my favorites, I think. Yeah, because we lived in one of those too. Your armor hit points are increased by 100%, shield resists cut in half, small weapon damage, so on your Tech 3 destroyers, your damage is increased by 200%. This is where you get like Cerberuses that are dealing 2000 DPS from like 150 kilometers away, which is really fun to do when people don't know what system you're in. And your signature radius is cut in half, which makes small ships incredibly powerful. And that's also why the C-13, which only allows small ships but has a C6 Wolf Rayette effect, is so fun, because you bring in a fleet of Tech 3 destroyers and you can run really strong sights, or you can have some really cool fights in there. I think that goes over everything. I've gone over Pulsar, Black Hole, Cataclysmic, Magnetar, Red Giant, and the Wolf Rayette. The vanilla is what we call it. The no effect has no effect, so there's really nothing to talk about there. Alright, the next thing that's important to talk about when it comes to wormholes is how do you roll a hole? And rolling a hole is putting enough mass through a wormhole that it collapses because so much mass has gone through it. Normally, wormholes will die around 16 hours after they originally spawn. So that's one way to keep track. There are 3 stages to that. There's even some legacy ones. There's has not yet begun its natural cycle of decay, which means there is 16 or more hours remaining on it. There is will probably not last another day, meaning there is 16 or less hours on it. And there is reaching the end of its natural lifetime, which means there are less than 4 hours remaining on that wormhole. So you should probably start pulling everything back. The next thing is the mass stages. Has not had its mass significantly disrupted, which is 50% or more of its original mass is still on the wormhole. Has had its mass disrupted, but not to a critical degree, meaning there is between 10 and 50% of its original mass remaining on that hole, and then there is on the verge of collapse, or has had its mass critically disrupted and is on the verge of collapse. That means that there is less than 10% of the original mass remaining on that wormhole. So how do I keep track of mass, or how do I get rid of a wormhole that I do not want? Well, that's where rolling comes in. So there are 5 different types of wormhole masses. There is a 1 million mass wormhole, there's a 2 million, a 3 million, and then I've heard that some high-sec wormholes have a 5 million mass. I haven't seen these, nor would I ever try and roll that, because that just sounds painful. The last type of wormhole is a frigate hole. I am not sure on the mass on this one. I can't find numbers anywhere. All I know is that they are a pain, because getting rid of them, there's a way to do it. I'm not going to share it here. If you know it, feel free to share it in the comments, or even private message me, and I might share it with you, depending on who you are. But from what I understand, that's a trade secret, and I'm not about to give that away here. Alright, so let's focus on the 1 million mass holes. First of all, I would recommend a Megathron, or a ship or battleship whose mass is naturally under 100,000 tons. So that would be your Apocalypse, your Megathron, your no, not a Roke. Might be I think it's a Raven, and the Tempest. I think those are your under 100 naturally. Then you're going to throw on a Higgs rig in the rigging section, and you're going to throw on a micro warp drive, a battleship class micro warp drive on there. Don't throw any plates. I would throw a tank, a micro jump drive, and whatever else you want on there, if you want to fit it out to just be slippery and get away, or if you want to fit it out to fight back if you get tackled. Usually if these things get tackled, they're probably going to die if you don't have support. But anyways, so you need one of those battleships that's under 100,000 tons naturally. You need to throw a battleship-sized micro warp drive on there and a Higgs rig. That'll put you slightly under 300,000 tons. So on the 1 million mass hole, what you're going to do, if you want to roll this hole, is you're going to send one of these ships out without the prop mod on. And then when you bring it back, make sure that prop mod is active. So that means you've put 200,000 tons going out, and about 300,000 tons coming back in, equaling 500,000 tons. The important thing to note about wormholes is that they can spawn with a scalar on their mass of from 0.9 up to 0.2. So what you're going to do here is, since you put 500,000 on it, if it's half-mast, you know it's either the 1 million mass or below. So you can send another ship of that same, another ship like that, out cold and back hot, and that will collapse it if it was half-mast. If it's not half-mast, you send a ship out hot meaning with a prop mod on, and you bring it back hot. Now, if you want to crit in this scenario, which critting off a wormhole is very good for if you want to rat, or if you want to just lock up your hole so nobody comes in and out, you make a cold hot pass. If it's half-mast, you do a cold pass. If it's not half-mast, that means you can put another 500,000 tons on it, so you can do another cold hot pass. Now that should crit it. Alright, moving on to the 2 million mass wormhole. This one's a little bit trickier, but what you can do is take 4 of these types of ships, send 4 out cold, and bring them all back hot. This will put 4 times 500,000 tons, which is enough to kill it. That will kill the wormhole. I'm pretty sure the risk of getting rolled out here, that is, the wormhole dies while you're on the wrong side of it, I'm pretty sure it's pretty minimal here. And then on the 3 million mass wormholes, which is, well, it's not typically there, but if you're in a C5 or C6 and it goes to another C5, C6, you can use one of these hole rolling battleships, and then you can take a capital ship out and back in, and that'll kill it. Almost every time, I think. Almost every time. I would recommend using a carrier, specifically a Nidhogger if you can do it, because a Nidhogger is pretty fast. You don't want to use a prop mod because the hole is too small. It can't support a battle carrier with a prop mod on. Again, there's another trick with this, but I'm not going to share it. because it's a secret Easter egg that if you figure it out, usually you understand what you're doing in wormhole space. Otherwise, if it's not a capital hole, if it doesn't allow very large ships, then you'll have to use battleships, and you can use 5 of the rolling battleships and send them out hot and bring them all back hot. If you do that all of them at the same time, you'll be just fine, and almost guaranteed you'll crit the hole or kill the hole. And if not, something you can do is take a heavy interdiction cruiser, put 4 interdiction sphere generators in the highs, put a Higgs rig on the ship, and then put a battleship-sized prop mod on it. You can fit it out however you want after that, but you need the battleship-sized prop mod. So what you do is when you're on your side of the hole, you turn your prop mod off, make sure it's off, activate all of your interdiction sphere generators, and then jump out. Those spheres, each one of them reduces your mass significantly. So when you have 4 of them active, your ship is like a couple 100 tons. So that way it's almost impossible for you to roll yourself out. I've done it, it's happened, but the risk is very small. And on your way back, do not activate the sphere generators. Instead, come back with your prop mod active. That means you go out with almost no mass, and you come back in with a lot of mass. And there goes my Discord again. I'm so sorry for that. The high sec holes, the 5 billion ones typically only, I think they do only go to high sec. So I wouldn't even worry about those. I've seen some people roll them in freighters, but that seems unnecessarily risky, especially to a high sec. Like, unless you're in real danger, just leave it. So that is the end of rolling different holes. If you guys have any questions on that, of course, leave them in the comments below. We can talk about salvage real quick, or wormhole resources. So wormholes have resources that are specific to Tech 3 production. So sleepers, when you kill them, they will drop wrecks and they will drop blue loot. Blue loot is something that you can sell to NPCs. There are buy orders up. Make sure you sell it to NPCs. Don't go to the trade hubs. You'll know it's not an NPC, or you'll know it's an NPC because it'll be an even value, and it will be exactly what the estimated value says. It won't be roughly, it will be exactly what the estimated ISK value is. Those you can't use in production, you can just sell those to NPCs for good money. Then there's salvage. When you destroy the sleepers, again, they drop the wrecks. You bring a salvager, and you'll get Tech 3 salvage out of them. And you take that back to your base and hold on to it, because now you're going to need to go run a relic site and get they're gold BPCs, and they'll say wrecked, malfunctioning, or intact sections. The wrecked ones, when you research them, which they require decent skills to research. I would not do these unless you have really good research skills. The wrecked ones will research into BPCs that have 3 runs. The malfunctioning will research into ones that have 10 runs, and the intact will research into 20 run BPCs. Now on these, you're going to need the gas that comes from wormhole space. Wormhole space will never spawn null or low sec gas. It will always be sleeper gas. You're going to need that stuff as well to build these Tech 3 cruisers, destroyers, subsystems. You're also going to need data site or specific data cores that come from the wormhole data sites. Now this is why wormhole data sites really suck, is because you can also get these data cores from mission farmers or agents in high sec, so their value is just nothing. They're so cheap to buy. So that's why I don't like running data sites. I could just run another combat site to get the data cores I need, but that's just me. Tech 3 production is really difficult, and I'm not going to go into it because it would take me like an hour. You're going to need a lot of spreadsheets to do it effectively. But thank you guys for watching this little tutorial. If you have any questions, drop in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them. If you know something that I don't or that I missed, please leave it in the comments below for other people to see. But in the meantime, guys, fly safe, and I hope to see you around the EVE community.